Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. You ready to jump into today's news? I'm excited to see what we find.
Absolutely. Always exciting to dig into these reports and really try to understand what's going on behind the scenes.
So today we're looking at the morning brief from Yahoo Finance. It's January 15th, 2025, and boy, do we have a lot to cover.
We do, from market movers and tech giants to international relations and even a little bit of quantum computing.
Sounds like a plan. So where should we begin? What's caught your eye?
Well, the topic everyone seems to be talking about is tariffs, specifically how President-elect Trump's policies are impacting the markets. It's creating a lot of buzz.
Yeah, tariffs. It's interesting, right? The markets initially reacted positively to the idea of a phased implementation.
They did. But there's still so much uncertainty surrounding the details of Trump's plan. It's making investors a bit nervous.
Makes sense. It's like waiting for the other shoe to drop. We know something's coming, but we just don't know what or when.
Exactly. And even with a gradual approach, tariffs could have a big impact. Ben Awash, who's a Washington correspondent, points out the competing pressures Trump is facing.
Like his protectionist stance versus the potential for economic fallout.
Right. And then you have Stephanie Roth from Wolf Research, and she suggests that current economic data doesn't necessarily justify tariffs, which hints at maybe some strategic motivations.
All very strategic, isn't it? Like a big game of chess with everyone trying to anticipate the next move. It makes you think.
It really does. And speaking of economic indicators, we should probably talk about inflation. The Producer Price Index, or PPI, came in below expectations this time around.
Which is a little bit of a relief, right? At least for now.
It is, but now everyone's eagerly waiting for the Consumer Price Index report, the CPI. This one really matters to people.
Because it directly affects the prices we see every day at the grocery store or when we fill up our gas tanks.
Exactly. So how do you think this all ties into the bigger economic picture? Any thoughts?
Well, inflation has a huge impact on the Federal Reserve's interest rate decisions. And those decisions can then impact risk appetite in the markets. It's a chain reaction.
Absolutely. And there's a real split among economists right now. Some are saying they anticipate progress in controlling inflation, while others believe it's going to be a tougher battle, especially with potential tariffs in the mix.
So it sounds like we could be in for a bit of a roller coaster ride in the coming months.
It's certainly a possibility, but that's the nature of the markets, isn't it? Always dynamic, always evolving.
Okay, well, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the tech world. Google is facing a pretty big investigation in the UK.
Oh, right. Over concerns of market dominance in search and online advertising, this is the first probe under these new, tougher antitrust rules.
Feels like a turning point, don't you think? Especially regarding how big tech companies are regulated internationally.
I agree. The potential consequences for Google are huge. They could even be forced to separate their ad platform from their other properties.
Wow, that would be a major shakeup for the entire industry. Talk about ripple effects. And while we're on the subject of shakeups, NVIDIA stock took a hit recently.
Yeah, after the White House announced new export limits on AI chips, it's caused a lot of uncertainty.
Especially because the definition of AI-designed chips isn't very clear. It's making investors hesitate.
And then there's the whole speculation that the incoming Trump administration might actually reverse these restrictions.
So it's a lot of wait and see for NVIDIA and the AI industry as a whole. It's like every decision made in Washington has these huge ripple effects across multiple sectors.
It's all interconnected. And speaking of shifts in leadership, there's been some big news from JP Chase.
Oh, what happened? Tell me more.
Well, Daniel Pinto, their president and COO, is retiring, so there's going to be some restructuring.
That's a big change. Who's going to be filling his shoes?
Jennifer Piepzak is taking over as COO, which is pretty significant. I mean, she's now a strong contender to become the first woman to lead JP Chase.
That would be historic. It really highlights the importance of diversity and representation at the top, especially in fields like finance, which have traditionally been male-dominated.
Absolutely. Okay, so how about we dive into something completely different now? Let's talk about quantum computing.
Okay, quantum computing. It feels like we're on the verge of something truly revolutionary. But the timeline is so unclear.
Isn't it? Mark Zuckerberg, for example, believes it'll be another decade or more before we see the full potential of quantum computing. But then you have people like Alan Barrett.
Who is he? Fill me in.
He's the CEO of D-Wave, a quantum computing company. He's actually arguing that it's already commercially viable. D-Wave focuses on annealing quantum computers, a specific type, and they already have customers using their systems.
So it's not all just hype and potential. There are tangible benefits emerging.
Right. However, some experts are a bit wary. They're comparing the current excitement to the dot-com bubble.
So approach with caution.
Exactly. Quantum computing has incredible potential, but there are still a lot of challenges to overcome.
Got it. Proceed with cautious optimism. Okay, so let's switch gears again and talk about something a bit more grounded. The California wildfires and the debates surrounding federal aid.
It's a really complex issue. You have lawmakers calling for stricter conditions on the aid, arguing that there needs to be greater accountability and more focus on preventative measures.
Like forest management.
Exactly. And things like state-level insurance regulation. We actually heard from Congressman Mike Flood, and he was really emphasizing that California needs to address some of its unique challenges in this area.
So it's not just about giving money, it's about promoting lasting change.
Right. It's about finding a balance between providing immediate relief for those affected and addressing the root causes of these recurring tragedies.
It's heartbreaking to see the devastation those fires caused.
Yeah.
Now let's shift our focus to the global stage. The war in Ukraine is still ongoing, and it's having a huge impact on oil markets. But there is some potentially good news.
Oh, what's that?
There are talks of a potential ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas. If that happens, it could help ease some of the pressure on oil prices.
That would be a welcome development for sure. But we can't forget about the sanctions targeting Russia's oil exports. They're still a major factor.
And then we have China and India buying discounted Russian oil, which further complicates things.
It really does. It's such a complex web of global politics and economics. Even the effectiveness of the sanctions is up for debate.
Some experts are saying they're weakening Russia's ability to finance the war, while others argue that they're having a limited impact.
It's hard to say for sure what the long-term effects will be. And then, of course, we have the added uncertainty of President-elect Trump's foreign policy.
Oh, right. He's a bit of a wild card, isn't he?
You could say that. His approach to international relations is definitely going to have ripple effects on everything, from oil markets to overall geopolitical stability.
We've covered so much ground already. Tariffs, inflation, tech probes, leadership changes, global conflicts. It's a lot to process.
It is. But before we move on, there's one more topic I think we should touch on: nuclear energy.
Nuclear energy, why is that making headlines?
It's becoming increasingly relevant because of the growing energy demands of big tech. Specifically, AI and data centers require a lot of power.
That makes sense. Data centers are energy-hungry beasts.
Exactly. And nuclear energy is emerging as a potential solution. President Biden actually issued an executive order opening up federal lands for AI data centers and clean energy facilities, which has further fueled interest in nuclear power.
It's like a perfect storm.
Yeah.
Increasing energy demands and a push for clean energy solutions.
That's a good way to put it. And Brian Singer from Goldman Sachs sees a lot of potential in nuclear energy's ability to meet these demands.
So is nuclear energy the answer?
Well, it's not a simple solution. There are still a lot of challenges associated with scaling up the industry, and it's certainly not a quick fix.
So it's more of a long-term play.
I think so. James Walker, who's the CEO of Nano Nuclear, stresses the importance of innovation and investment in pushing the sector forward. He really sees big tech's involvement as crucial for driving progress.
It's fascinating to see how these seemingly unrelated sectors are converging.
It really highlights how interconnected our world is. Solutions to one challenge can often lead to opportunities in other areas. Welcome back. I'm glad we're getting to spend more time unpacking some of these stories.
Me too. There's a lot to think about here. Where should we pick up?
Well, we were just talking about nuclear energy and its potential to meet the growing energy demands. It's interesting, right?
It is, especially with big tech companies like Google and Meta needing so much power for their data centers and AI.
Exactly. And it's not just those companies. The whole world is becoming increasingly reliant on technology, which means the demand for energy is only going to go up.
So is nuclear energy the answer? Is it really a viable solution?
Well, it's not a simple yes or no answer. There are definitely a lot of challenges involved in scaling up the nuclear energy industry.
I can imagine. It's not like flipping a switch. What are some of the biggest hurdles they're facing?
Well, for one, there are the upfront costs. Building nuclear power plants is incredibly expensive. And then there's the whole issue of safety and waste disposal.
Right. Nuclear waste is a big concern. And people are understandably nervous about the potential for accidents.
Yeah, the safety concerns are real, but proponents of nuclear energy argue that it's actually one of the safest forms of energy production when you look at the data.
Interesting. So it sounds like there's a lot to weigh when it comes to nuclear energy. It's not a perfect solution, but it could potentially be a piece of the puzzle.
I think so. And it's definitely a conversation worth having, especially as we look for ways to meet the growing energy demands of the future.
Okay, well, let's switch gears a bit and revisit another complex issue we touched on earlier, the California wildfires and the debate surrounding federal aid. It's a tough situation.
It really is. Those fires were devastating, and so many people lost everything.
I can't even imagine what they're going through. But it sounds like there's some disagreement about how to best provide support.
Yeah, you have lawmakers who are calling for stricter conditions on the federal aid, arguing that there needs to be more accountability and a greater emphasis on preventative measures.
Like better forest management and maybe even some changes to insurance regulations.
Right. They're saying that federal aid shouldn't just be a blank check. It should be used as an opportunity to address the root causes of these fires.
That makes sense. But at the same time, people need help now. They can't wait for long-term solutions to be put in place.
Absolutely. It's a delicate balance, and there's no easy answer. But it's an important conversation to have.
It is. Okay, well, let's move on to a topic that's been dominating headlines for months. The war in Ukraine. It's a heartbreaking situation, and it's having a huge impact on the world, especially when it comes to energy prices.
It's true. The war has created so much uncertainty in the global energy markets, and that's something we're all feeling.
Yeah, the price of gas has been crazy high.
Yeah.
But there was some potentially good news recently, right? About a possible ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas.
Oh, right. Yeah, if that happens, it could definitely help ease some of the pressure on oil prices, but the situation is still very fluid, so we'll have to wait and see what unfolds.
Fingers crossed. But even if that ceasefire goes through, there are still the sanctions against Russia's oil exports to consider. Those are still a major factor driving up prices, right?
They are. And then you have countries like China and India who are actually buying discounted Russian oil, which is kind of throwing a wrench into the whole situation.
So it's like a big tug of war, with everyone trying to secure their energy supplies while also navigating all these political and economic complexities.
Exactly. It's a really challenging situation. And then, of course, there's the whole question of how effective the sanctions actually are.
I was just going to ask about that. Some people are saying they're working, while others argue that they're having a limited impact.
Yeah, it's hard to say for sure what the long-term effects will be. And then on top of all that, we have the uncertainty surrounding President-elect Trump's foreign policy.
Oh, right. He's a bit of a wild card, isn't he?
Yeah.
It's hard to predict how he'll approach these global issues.
It is. His decisions could definitely have a ripple effect on everything, from energy markets to geopolitical stability. It's something to keep a close eye on.
Definitely. So we've covered a lot of ground here, from nuclear energy and wildfires to the war in Ukraine and its impact on the global energy landscape. It's a lot to think about.
It really is, and it just highlights how interconnected our world is. These issues, even though they might seem separate, are all intertwined.
You're right. It's like a giant web, and every action has a reaction.
Okay, so before we wrap things up, there's one more topic I want to circle back to. It's something we touched on earlier, but I think it deserves a bit more attention.
What's that? I'm all ears.
Quantum computing. It's such a fascinating and rapidly developing field, and it has the potential to completely revolutionize the way we live and work.
I agree. It's mind-blowing to think about the possibilities, but it also feels a bit like science fiction. You know, like something out of Star Trek.
I know what you mean. But the reality is that quantum computing is already starting to have real-world applications.
Really? Like what?
Well, for example, it's being used to develop new drugs and materials, to improve financial modeling, and even to create more secure encryption methods.
Wow, that's incredible. So it's not just theoretical anymore. It's actually making a difference.
Exactly. And as the technology continues to advance, we can expect to see even more groundbreaking applications emerge. It's truly an exciting time to be following this field.
Quantum computing.
Yeah.
It really feels like we're on the cusp of something huge. Like we're just starting to scratch the surface of what's possible.
I agree. And it's amazing how quickly the field is advancing. I mean, just a few years ago, it was mostly theoretical, but now we're seeing real-world applications emerging all the time.
It's mind-blowing to think about the potential impact on everything, from medicine and material science to finance and cybersecurity.
It really is. Quantum computers have the ability to solve problems that are simply impossible for classical computers to handle. It's a whole new paradigm of computing.
I'm trying to wrap my head around it, but
Yeah.
it's so complex. It feels like we need a whole separate deep dive just on quantum computing.
We probably could, but for now, I think the key takeaway is that this technology is going to have a profound impact on our lives, even if we don't fully understand how it works.
That's true. It's like with the internet in the early days, most people didn't really understand how it worked, but they could still see the potential.
Exactly. And I think we're seeing a similar thing with quantum computing now. There's a lot of excitement, a lot of hype, but there's also a growing recognition that this is something truly transformative.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from our conversation today?
That's a good question. I think the most important thing is to stay curious and engaged. The world is changing rapidly, and it's more important than ever to be informed and to think critically about the information we're consuming.
I agree. We can't just passively absorb everything we hear and read. We need to ask questions, challenge assumptions, and be willing to learn and adapt.
Exactly. And that's what these deep dives are all about. They're an opportunity to explore complex issues, to hear different perspectives, and to hopefully come away with a better understanding of the forces shaping our world.
It's been a fascinating journey through the headlines. We've covered a lot of ground, from the economic implications of tariffs and inflation to the ethical considerations of AI and the geopolitical complexities of the war in Ukraine.
And let's not forget about those California wildfires and the ongoing debate about federal aid. It's been a whirlwind tour of current events.
But I think we managed to connect the dots and shed some light on the underlying trends that are shaping our world. At least, I hope we did.
I think so too. And even though we've reached the end of this deep dive, the conversation doesn't stop here. We encourage everyone to continue exploring these topics, to stay informed, and to engage in thoughtful discussions with others.
Exactly. Because ultimately, the more informed and engaged we are as individuals, the better equipped we'll be to navigate the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead.
Well said. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another exploration of the news and events that matter most.
Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and keep those brains buzzing.